We're back to our study in Genesis. We have got wives, now get wealth. And just to give you an idea, or remind you of where we've been talking about Jacob. And the last time we were in Genesis, we looked at the chapter that covered the accumulation of his 4 wives. 2 of them were sisters, and they bicker and fight the entire time, not surprisingly. 2 of them are slaves of those sisters. They don't have any right to fight and bicker, so we don't read of them anyway, but they probably did. They're human. In any case, that is what we have studied about Jacob thus far, or at least most recently. And today we're going to talk about that he continued living where he lived, which seems to be only about wealth. And I bring that up because another possible title for this would be the God of Chesed, the God who keeps Chesed, or maybe even something along the lines of God is accommodating. He does not accommodate sin, but he most certainly, and if you have never thought about this before, you'll think about it today at least. And where you will fall on this is really, I don't know. I don't even know where I fall yet on this. How far does God go with his people in letting them choose their life, choose their patterns of life, choose the way they behave? Sometimes it's even sinful, and he keeps working with them. Now, I don't even think this one's sinful. All of us have to work, right? We sang the song, "Everyone Needs Forgiveness." Well, that's true, but it's probably equally true. We could sing the song, "Just about everybody has to work." Maybe if you are married and you have one person who has a good enough income, maybe you could. One of the two could not work. But that's pretty rare anymore in America. That hasn't been real probably since the 40s, 50s, that a family doesn't need 2 incomes. It's been pretty rare to even say that all throughout history that both people don't have to work. It's just that one typically didn't work outside the home and didn't receive a paycheck, right? And that typically was the woman throughout history, but most certainly she worked. So it's probably pretty unlikely to think about that, but for the most part, we all have to work. Nobody's going to have a problem with Jacob here working. But again, as a reminder, I'll just point out to you that he is the inheritor of God's promises made to Abraham. He is the inheritor of then the land of what will be Israel. It's still not called that yet. It's likely at this time in history called Canaan. But he is the inheritor of that. But he has left that land. He has left that land to go to Haran or somewhere near there, where Abraham was from, and where his father was from, to get wives. To get a wife. I don't know that he really set out to get 4. I'm not sure anybody really plans that one, but somehow that worked, right? And we've read how it worked for him, but I mean, I don't know how people start out in life probably not thinking they will have multiple marriages. That's my guess. But they happen, and they do happen, and we see it all around us, both in the church and in culture. That's just real. It was real for Jacob. In addition to that, he has now the obtaining of wealth in mind. That's today's teaching. It comes from Genesis 30, and starting in verse 25, and following. So FF just means all that follows. I'm going to read this first part of this text. We've had a lot of complications already this morning if you haven't been aware of them. We have been kind of trying to just make this morning work. Like, for example, I see all of you still have coats on. Oddly enough, both the heat and the air conditioning were on all night. But you'd think, well, then why didn't the heat make it at least a little warmer in here? Well, the heat, there's a pressure valve switch that doesn't work anymore. And it has to be encouraged to work. And so it takes some time off and takes breaks throughout the time that the heating system is on. So that's been going on. We didn't have PowerPoint slides forwarded to us. We had an email that was forwarded without the PowerPoint slides. So I made those really plain purple-looking things for the last 20 minutes up here. But that also means that I didn't get to rearrange my one slide or at least one that's at the end. And so after I read the text, I might just get rid of the slides because they won't really matter at that point. But in any case, the text is up here. Let's read it. Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph, so that was the last child that we heard about being born through all that fighting, that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me depart. For you yourself know my service which I have rendered you." But Laban said to him, "If now it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that Yahweh has blessed me on your account." He continued, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." But he said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude, and Yahweh has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also?" Okay? So that sets up the scenario and it sets up the dilemma, right? Jacob wants to leave. You'll note that he says, "I want to go to my own country, my own land." So he still understands himself to be the inheritor of these things. You could still ask the question, so why'd you ever leave? And I keep asking that question. Okay? I do. I genuinely ask, why did you leave? What was the point of that? But he says what also is true. I got what I came for. I am married with kids. That's why I came here. That's one of my favorite questions to ask anybody who's not from Reading. Why did you come here? It's one of my favorite questions. I love to hear people's stories, how they got to Reading, Pennsylvania. And but this is Jacob's story, right? Why did you get to Haran? How did you get to Haran? I wanted wives, or I wanted a family. And I was coming back to where my ancestors are from. I wanted that. But now I want to leave. And Laban says, "I have divined," that's the New American Standard, "that this is good for me to have you here. Your presence in my life causes me to prosper." Do you ever have a boss like that? "I don't want you to leave this job." Why? "Well, you make my life prosper. You actually make money for me. You're a good employee. I don't want you to leave." So he offers him a raise, right? "Tell me your price so that I can make you stay." And Jacob says, "Okay, well, listen, remember that you didn't have very much until I came. And now you're wealthy. But now it's time for me to get wealth for my family." That's what we've read thus far. And so he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything." Man, do I wish Christians would accept this as a principle of life. That, first of all, the idea of entitlement, that is something I could drop kick into the next century. Okay? I have zero idea why anybody believes they're entitled to anything. I just do not even understand it. My first job was when I was 14 years old. I did paper route before that, but my first job was 14. I have been working at least 30 hours a week since I was 16, and that's because of child labor laws. I wasn't allowed to work full time. Right now, I have 3 jobs. Okay? I'm saying that not so you can say, "Whoa, you're so amazing." That's not it. You might even think I'm wrong to do it. Sometimes I think I'm wrong to do it. I'm pointing that out simply to note this, though. I do not understand entitlement. I do not understand people that do not work and think they should get money from the government. I do not understand socialized Medicare. I do not understand socialized medicine. I do not understand any of it. I really don't. Here's Jacob. What shall I give you? Nothing. You will never give me anything. I wish Christians thought like this. He's not the only person we've ever seen talk like this. Abraham, his grandfather, talked like this. When he defeated somebody in battle, he said, what should we give you? And he said, you'll give me nothing. In fact, here's all your possessions back. It will never, and this is what Abraham said, it will never be said that my wealth came from you. I trust in Yahweh. I just don't get it. Jacob is another example of this, though, that I don't take anything. I will work for it. Now, that you could say, well, he sounds like a really good, upstanding guy. He's a weasel. We've been watching this guy be a weasel all of his life. You're about to watch him weasel things out of his father-in-law, his own family. He's going to get his possession by essentially manipulation. But I will acknowledge at least one good principle of his life is he didn't just take things from people. He worked for it. All right, in any case, where did I leave off? 32. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep. Okay, so if you think of sheep, sheep are typically all one color, white or sometimes black, sometimes brown. But what he's saying is, I want to take all the ones that are speckled, they have little dots all over them, or spotted, like this one's white, but it has a big patch of black. Okay? Take those and separate those from the good-looking, right ones, the ones we all think in animal husbandry. These are the right ones. Okay? So he wants all those sort of spotted ones, and then also every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come concerning my wages. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen. Laban said, God, let it be according to your word. Okay, so I want all the ones you don't want. That's what I'll take, and I'll care for them. And he's going to say, and I'll care for your good ones as well. But then this is what happens. So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. 3 days, because we're going to make sure they do not procreate with each other. We're going to make sure that these flocks are completely separated. I would like to go into some things about the Lord here, but I'm not going to. I want to deal with the facts first in this as we go through Genesis this first time. But why do you think 3 days? Why 3? You don't think that has something to do with the resurrection? That I'm going to literally separate from the old life, death, to a new life. No one will ever say anything from the old is part of the new. You don't think that was in mind? I submit to you it was in mind. He could have went 5 days. In fact, he could have went 2 days. The sheep would have never saw each other. But he went 3 days, and I don't think he knew that, by the way. Okay, so in any case, where did I leave off again? 37. Okay, now here's how this does not work. Don't try this at home. Okay? Do not try this at home. This is not an experiment that will work. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters. That's where they keep water. Even in the watering troughs, where the flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. Okay? I don't have a tree here, but we'll pretend this is a tree. Okay? This is a poplar tree. He cut down the tree, took a knife, and he cut the bark off in stripes. Okay? And then when the sheep came, we'll pretend that this is a little watering trough. When the sheep came to do that, he laid the striped trees in front of them. Okay? All of this was to get them to mate when they came to drink. So now they're here drinking, the striped rods here, and they mate. Okay? That's why I said this doesn't work. Don't bother trying this. Okay? So, verse 39, so the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban, and he put his own herds apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flock in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in, so the feeble were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Okay, animal husbandry. Okay, if you didn't follow all that, we're just talking about farming. That's all we're talking about. We still practice farming things. We don't do this. No, Penn State doesn't teach this. If you go to the ag, department up at Penn State, you're not learning this idea. But that doesn't mean you're not learning animal husbandry. Okay? You most certainly are learning that, for example, with sheep. Okay? If you have a ewe that only lambs one lamb, the first year she's able to do this, okay, which is right about now. They are right now breeding. They will have their babies, or actually I think they're just about ready to give birth right now, because their lambs will be ready by Easter. If you ever had an Easter lamb, that's how this works. Okay? They're just about ready to drop lambs right now, where we live. If a ewe only has one lamb, she has already been tattooed by the farmer. She already has a number probably on her ear. She's 0001, whatever. He writes down in his little notebook, 0001, one lamb. She'll never breed again. She'll be sold for lamb meat that summer. Okay? However, if lamb 002 had twins, she'll be bred again. Okay? Eventually, you keep doing that, you get the sheep that have twins, minimum, every year. Okay? You might even, if you got one that has triplets, you're marking her down. She's getting bred as much as we can. Okay? You don't have to like animal husbandry. I don't really care if that's your thing. Well, why would they do? Because they're trying to get the most animals out of the things. That's how they make their livelihood. Well, Jacob's idea, though, was not so much for characteristics. By the way, there's more that goes into that. I know that. Not so much the characteristics of the amount of meat that's on the lamb by the time of Easter time. Not so much the amount of wool that's on it when you go to harvest the wool, if it's a lamb for wool, for merino sheep or whatever. His theory is lay these branches down when the strong ones come. And then they'll be the only ones that mate, and they'll be the ones that give me spotted and speckled animals, and Laban will have to admit those ones are mine. Okay? But what's crazy is, this is what's crazy, it worked. This literally worked. I guarantee there's nobody that teaches this, because it doesn't work. But it worked. Say, well, why did it work? Well, who gives life? God. God made this work. But it doesn't work. But God made it work. Say, well, why would God do that? Well, I'll ask you this question. Why would God do any miracle? All miracles are things that aren't supposed to work. But they work. And God did this. It worked. Why did he do it? Well, that's why I said maybe we could entitle this a different question today, and that is, does God accommodate us? We'll come back to this because I want to talk a lot. That's what I really want to finish with as one big takeaway from this thing. Aside from seeing the facts, aside from seeing the things that we need so that later on in our Christian walk, you and I can talk about things about the Lord Jesus Christ and reference these things and say, this is part of how God was leading 3 days' journey. This deals with the resurrection, deals with real life, it deals with the fruit that comes out of that life. We can talk about all that another time, but you have to know facts too to even get there, okay? So I want to deal with that, and I want to deal with this question of accommodation, because I think this challenges basically anyone's thinking about God that I know of. Because does God really do this for His people? Does He do it for you? If you come up with some lame-brained way to make wealth for yourself, does God accommodate that? And do you think, oh, I did this, and really God did it? That's potentially what happens. It's certainly what happens here. And the one last case I'm going to show you, it seems like it even happens when we sin doing it. This is manipulative. I don't know, maybe you'd call that sin. Maybe you would struggle with this one. Is Jacob stealing from Laban by doing this? And is God helping that? Well, certainly God doesn't help with the sin. But is that what's happening in Jacob's life? His name does literally mean supplanter. He is a guy who manipulates to get things. We've been seeing that all the time. He never changes in his life. It never changes in his life. And yet God keeps working with him. And crazy, and we've made this point, crazy, he keeps working with him even as the leader of God's people. Crazy. But is this something God will do for you? Are you doing something in your life that really isn't right? It's not true. Maybe it's wrong even. Maybe it's sin. But what I mean by it's not right is, are you literally saying that the way the world works, you put square tires on a vehicle and it will go, and God says, well, yours will? Because He's just working with you. Even though everyone around you would say, that doesn't work. That's not real. Does He do this still? Okay, next slide. I got to really finish this, at least the text, so we can talk a little bit more about it. Oh, there it is. We're done with it. Okay. And that last slide, let me just show you the text that's up there. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 7 through 12. That's the only other text I wanted to deal with, just for the sake of time. If you don't know this text, I really submit to you, you ought to go home and read this text. You're going to struggle with it. You're going to struggle with it. Okay? This is David. And David is succeeding Saul. He has succeeded Saul as king. And he has married lots of women. And after marrying all these women, he literally sets up a scenario where he sleeps with a woman who he saw nude sunbathing. Okay, that's literally what she was doing. He saw her, decided, I'd like to sleep with her. Does, and she gets pregnant. And they don't have the morning after pill. So, and you say, well, he wouldn't have done that. Well, you're crazy because he kills her husband. So don't tell me he wouldn't have done it. I don't know what he would have done. Okay? But literally, well, what are we going to do? I got her pregnant. So he comes up with this lame-brained scheme. This is Uriah and Bathsheba, if you don't know this story. He calls Uriah back from a war. And he says, hey, how's it going? Good manipulator. And Uriah says, it's fine, but I don't know why you called me. We're fighting a battle. He says, hey, listen, we're going to have a party tomorrow. I just want to know how the battle's going. But why don't you go home tonight, take a shower, sleep with your wife. Now, Uriah has no idea what he's getting at, but David's whole point is, I need you to make sure that she's pregnant and it looks like it's from you. Right? And so he says, no, I'm not doing that. He says, my fellow soldiers are out in the field. They're fighting a war. I'm not going to go home and have sex with my wife while they do that. I'm not doing that. And David says, no, seriously, go do it. He gets him drunk. And instead of doing that, Uriah, because he is an upright person, although he gets drunk, he's an upright person, he literally goes right outside the castle when he sleeps right outside the castle. They wake up in the morning, and David's servants say, hey, Uriah didn't go home. Calls him in, he says, why didn't you go home? He said, I told you, I'm not going home. I'm not doing this. And so David writes a letter. In the letter, he writes it to his chief commanding officer. He says, hey, what I want you to do is I want you to, you know where the thickest part of the battle is, like where it's really serious, like it doesn't look good. Put Uriah there. And then when the battle's really in the heat of it, withdraw everybody but Uriah. Uriah is killed in battle. David literally had a guy murdered. He hired a hitman. Hired a hitman, killed the guy. And then he took Bathsheba for a wife. And then God says this. What's up there? That passage that's up there. The passage isn't up there. The reference is. And God says, seriously, David, haven't I blessed you? Haven't I given you everything? And the one thing he says that he gave him was all of Saul's wives. God gave him multiple wives. Now, don't you want to rip your hair out and yell at God? Because you're not allowed to do that. And then God said this, and if you wanted more, I would have given you more. Now what do you do with God? Now, David in that situation, okay, just to culturally to understand what's going on there. It was illegal in the Old Testament laws for a son to ever marry his father's wife. You say, well, that's, of course, that would be his mother. Not always. Not always. But it was always against the law for a son to marry his father's wife. That's important with kings because normally the succession of kings is from father to son. And so this particular thing has never happened and never happens again in Israel. Ever. You never, ever have your father's wives. And most kings are the sons of the father. But David wasn't, if you remember that. Saul was elected king, or not elected king, but he was crowned king, chosen by the people, so elected. By the way, not all elections are good. Not all elections are good. Saul was a horrible king. God got rid of him. And he set up a kingdom instead with David, who was his choice for king. Because of that, David is not Saul's son. God gave Saul's wives to David. Now you, again, may not like this, but I'm just, again, speaking culturally. Those women normally would have been taken care of by their son. He would have provided for them, though he would not have married them. The next king in line, the son, that's his father's stuff. This is his family. Normally, he would have cared for them. David had no responsibility to Saul's wives. These women literally would not have had a life at all. So what you might see as a problem for God, I actually see as a compassionate move of God to care for women who would have been deposed and would never have been able to marry anybody. That would have never happened. And they would have starved. So literally, by giving them to David, God cared for them. Now, you don't have to like all that. You don't have to say, God, what the heck, I don't understand why you give him multiple wives here. I'm just acknowledging God was caring for these women by doing this in a culture that they never would have had any other way. It would not have happened any other way. And David, by the way, seems very serious about helping Saul's family, right? Mephibosheth, if you know that story as well, he is a crippled man who is a relative of Saul. David takes him in and makes him part of his royal family. He eats with David for the rest of his life. David's really serious about you honor people. You care for people. So I don't think, as much as you might think this is a horrible situation, that it's really that horrible of a situation. I think it's kind of like, this is how you guys work, and I'm going to care for people. Okay, but it is still sin. Right? Multiple wives, still sin. Adultery is sin. I don't know what else to tell people that don't go there. But God said, and if you wanted more, I'd have given you more. That's crazy kind of conversation. But I will just say, this is a God of chesed. A God who keeps chesed. That's how he has revealed himself. That he cares for, that he supports, that he even blesses his people despite their sin. Ultimately, he will live and die for their sin. He will be the one who dies for their sins. And yet he keeps caring for them. That's what God reveals about himself. In Jacob's story, it's not necessarily sin. To have a job, to get wealth, I'm not saying that's sin. Although, by the way, too, I wanted to point this out from last week. Those of you who were here last week, talked about money. And I never got to this place, and I kind of thought maybe we would in our discussion afterwards, but we didn't. And that is, yes, here's all these things you could spend money on, right? Your family, that includes your extended family, and your in-laws. Then you have your pastor, right? You got to pay for your pastor. Then you have people who live by the gospel. Then you just have do good and share with the rest of it. And I think it was on the slide, but I don't think I said it. That might include things like school teachers in Kenya, like the Dixons. They don't actually live for the gospel. Okay? They're not the people out there evangelizing and church planting. They are teaching kids from parents who are doing that. So they are a help support, they are a help ministry of that kind of thing. But they themselves are not living by the gospel. They're living by teaching physics. I don't know. Okay, that's not unlike a physics teacher here in America. My thing I never got to was, but how do you prioritize all that? How do you figure out how to spend your money? And I submit to you that if it's required in those categories, you have to do those. So you have to take care of your family. You have to pay your pastor. You have to support the gospel. The rest of it, you don't have to do. That's all of life. That's all of life. You do not have to do any of it. You say, well, what if I have to do it to obey the government? You could disobey the government. You can go to jail and start a jail ministry. I don't care. That's your choice. If you don't want to do a jail ministry, pay the tax. Jesus didn't think a whole lot about taxes. Don't we pay this tax? Sure, go get a fish and get the coin out of its mouth. He didn't go get a job to pay for it. Prioritizing leaves everything else at the end. After that, you can figure it out on your own. What do you want to support? What do you want in life? Do you want heat and air conditioning? And do you want them at the same time? It's a legitimate question. Most of you do not look like you want it at the same time right now. Do you want a video camera? Do you want a church with a big high ceiling? Do you want pews? Go to your family. Do you want, I got to be really careful because I don't want to hit anything anyone has. Do you want a Dodge Ram 1500 quad cab red versus a Volkswagen Bug gray that's convertible? That's all me, okay? That's not any of you. All those are choices. They're all choices. If you have the money, great. If you don't have the money, don't. That's fine too. Okay, back to today's teaching. Prioritizing, really, honestly, this is what you have to pay for. Your family's life, your pastor, people who support the gospel. And if you say, wait, don't you have to pay for this or that, the really important things. Listen, of the three of those, here's what Jesus said about the family one. If you love your family more than me, you're not my disciple. So while I'm putting it up there pretty high, I'm admitting he doesn't think it's the highest thing. Okay, your family's not even the highest thing. We talk about the people who gave up their lives for the gospel. Those are the people we go, oh yeah, Paul, Peter. That's why we do.